Do you know that roughly 1 in every 200 men alive on Earth today is a direct descendant of a 13th century warlord? A man who was once a starving, homeless boy, abandoned by his own tribe, hunted by his enemies, and forced to survive alone in the wilderness of the Mongolian steppe? That same boy grew up to conquer more territory than any single person in human history, more than Alexander the Great, more than the Roman Empire at its height, more than Napoleon ever dreamed of. His name was Temujin. The world would come to know him as Genghis Khan. This is the story of how a boy with nothing built an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe, and how the empire he built was far stranger, far more sophisticated, and far more consequential than the image of pure savagery history has left us with. The boy with nothing. Temujin was born around 1162 into a minor noble family of the Borjigin clan on the harsh grassland steppes of what is now Mongolia. His father, a tribal chief, was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was only about 9 years old. Without their protector, Temujin's family was abandoned by their own clan and left to fend for themselves on the open steppe. For years, Temujin's mother raised her children alone, foraging for roots and berries, hunting small game, doing whatever it took to keep the family alive. Temujin himself was, at one point, captured and enslaved by a rival clan, forced to wear a wooden yoke around his neck. He escaped captivity, and in the years that followed, he began slowly rebuilding what his family had lost, forming alliances, taking revenge on enemies, and gathering a small but fiercely loyal following. By his 20s, Temujin was not just surviving, he was becoming something the fractured, endlessly warring tribes of the Mongolian steppe had never seen before, a leader who chose his followers based on loyalty and skill rather than bloodline or birth. Uniting the steppe. For centuries, the Mongolian steppe had been home to dozens of nomadic tribes, the Merkit, the Tatars, the Naiman, the Karait, locked in an endless cycle of raiding, betrayal, and blood feuds. No one had ever managed to unite them. Temujin did. Through a combination of military skill, political alliances, and a reputation for rewarding loyalty while crushing betrayal without mercy, Temujin defeated rival chief after rival chief. He broke apart the old tribal structure entirely, reorganizing his followers into military units based on merit rather than family ties, a radical restructuring of steppe society that had never been attempted before. In 1206, at a great assembly of Mongol leaders, Temujin was declared ruler of all the united Mongol tribes and given the title Genghis Khan, widely translated as universal ruler or oceanic ruler. For the first time in history, the Mongol people were one nation, and that nation was about to look outward. The war machine. What made Genghis Khan's armies so devastatingly effective was not simply numbers. His forces were often outnumbered by the empires they conquered. It was organization, discipline, and innovation. Every Mongol soldier was a horseman, trained from childhood, capable of riding for days while eating, sleeping, and fighting from the saddle. Mongol armies used coordinated signal flags and messenger relays to communicate across vast distances, allowing commanders to coordinate movements with a precision no medieval European or Chinese army could match. They mastered feigned retreats, luring larger enemy forces into traps, and when they encountered fortified cities they couldn't outride, they adapted quickly, adopting siege technology and engineers from the very civilizations they conquered. Genghis Khan's conquests eventually stretched from the Pacific coast of China to the Caspian Sea, encompassing more contiguous land than any empire before or since. Cities that resisted were often destroyed utterly, their populations killed or scattered, as a calculated strategy of terror designed to make the next city surrender without a fight. Historians estimate the Mongol conquests may have killed tens of millions of people, one of the deadliest periods of warfare in human history. The other Genghis Khan.
But the story most people are taught stops there, at the terror and bloodshed. What is far less taught is what Genghis Khan created once the fighting was done. Genghis Khan created the Yasa, a unified code of law that applied to every subject of his empire, regardless of tribe, religion, or ethnicity, an extraordinary concept for its time. He declared religious tolerance across his territories, protecting Buddhist monks, Christian priests, Muslim imams, and Taoist scholars alike, and exempting religious leaders from taxation. He established one of the first reliable postal and courier systems in history, the Yam, with relay stations allowing messages to cross thousands of miles in days rather than months. Under Mongol rule, the trade routes of Central Asia, later known as the Silk Road, became safer and more heavily used than they had ever been, thanks to a period historians call the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace. Merchants, scholars, and travelers could cross from China to Europe under Mongol protection with a level of safety unmatched in the medieval world. It was this very network that, generations later, a young Venetian named Marco Polo traveled to the court of Genghis Khan's grandson and returned with tales that reshaped European understanding of the world. Genghis Khan himself was reportedly illiterate his entire life, yet he understood the value of literacy so deeply that he ordered a written script created for the Mongol language and had his sons and generals educated by captured scholars from conquered lands.
Death and the hidden grave. Genghis Khan died in 1227 during a military campaign against the Western Xia Kingdom in what is now northern China. The exact cause of his death remains uncertain. Ancient sources offer competing accounts, from injury after a fall from his horse, to illness, to wounds sustained in battle. What happened next is one of history's most enduring mysteries. Genghis Khan's followers deliberately concealed the location of his burial. According to legend, the funeral procession killed everyone they encountered along the route to prevent word from spreading, and the soldiers who buried him were killed by other soldiers who were killed in turn so that no living person would know the location of his grave. Horses were said to have trampled the burial site afterward to erase any trace. To this day, despite extensive searching using satellite imagery and modern archaeology, the tomb of Genghis Khan has never been found. The empire after him. After Genghis Khan's death, his descendants continued expanding the empire he had built, eventually stretching it to become the largest contiguous land empire in human history, covering roughly 22% of the Earth's total land area at its peak, an area larger than the continent of Africa at its peak, an area larger than the continent of Africa. His grandson Kublai Khan would go on to conquer the whole of China and found the Yuan dynasty, becoming the ruler that Marco Polo would later describe to an astonished Europe. Other branches of the family ruled Persia, Central Asia, and Russia for generations. And in the 21st century, genetic studies of populations across Central Asia identified a Y chromosome lineage so widespread, appearing in roughly 8% of men across a huge swath of the former Mongol Empire and an estimated 16 million men worldwide, that researchers concluded it most likely traces back to a single common ancestor living around the time of Genghis Khan. While the identification remains debated among historians, it points to something almost impossible to comprehend, that the bloodline of one 13th century boy, once abandoned and enslaved on the open steppe, may now run through tens of millions of people alive today. Genghis Khan is remembered by many as history's most brutal conqueror, and the devastation of his campaigns was real and staggering. But he was also a lawgiver, a champion of religious tolerance in an intolerant age, and the architect of a trade network that connected East and West more completely than at any point before the modern era.
A boy who owned nothing became the ruler of nearly a quarter of the known world, and whether by empire or by bloodline, his legacy may be more alive today than that of any other human being in history. History is never as simple as the story we were taught. If this changed how you see the medieval world, share it with someone who needs to know. Subscribe to Ancient Curiouz and hit the notification bell so you never miss a piece of history left out of the textbooks. New episodes every week. I'll see you in the next one.